That human versus AI decision-making matrix is going to be one of those philosophical moments in human history where we have to sort of decide what we want and, what it means to be human in that, when AI can show us from a logical perspective that there's a better way to do things and it's arguing against hundreds of years of human intent and instinct.
Welcome to the Digitally Curious podcast. Today, two Australian futurists walk into a podcast. My guest today is Brett King, who I've followed his work for some time now. We actually caught up in London. In-person futurist meetings are always the best, but we thought we'd jot down some ideas. But Brett, welcome to my show.
Welcome to the Futurists. Yes, we can do a dual branded mashup and release this together. It's great to finally meet you and great to be collaborating.
We both got our sort of futurist stories. When did you realise you were first a futurist?
I actually have a slightly different angle to this, which I tried to be a science fiction writer first. When I was in my early 20s, I wrote my first book, which was a sci-fi novel. Never got published. Always had a big interest in, particularly at that time, Arthur C. Clarke, Asimov, Ray Bradbury, those types of big, deep science writers. But realized also that there was sort of this convergence with my career as an advisor in technology, where I was always talking about the next generation of technology. And then that sort of coalesced into this sort of super forecasting, so what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years with the tech, applying sort of the science fiction love that I had. So the emerging future technologies and applying that to what I was doing. So it sort of evolved in that way. But I guess the first time I called myself a futurist, probably sometime in between the first couple of books, where it was fairly clear that I was talking about something happening that was emerging tech that was happening over the next 5 to 10 years, and started to consider myself a futurist, at least in the banking space, and then expanded that to more general conversation. What about you?
Well, I've got a couple of angles there. So when I was in my final year at school in Australia, we had to do an English essay. It had to be an essay on a topic, and I chose the future. And so I read 1984, Clockwork Orange, Brave New World, and Animal Farm, and strung those together and never thought much more of it. And when I was at Telstra in 2000, my boss at the time, Libby Christie, said, I don't want to do this webisode, which we now call webinars. You go and do it. And Libby Jan Charleston, who was the interviewer, said,
Today's guest speaker is Andrew Grill, a futurist from Telstra.
My definition of a futurist?
What's your definition?
Never being wrong today.
You look at 5 to 50 years. I look at 5 minutes to 18 months. And that I think is an interesting distinction between the two of us. But when someone asks me, so what's it going to be like in 20 years' time? I do put an asterisk there. Any of your predictions come true?
Tons. Obviously, I've done a lot of work in the banking space. And I tend to call them forecasts instead of predictions for obvious reasons, because it's more of a methodology approach. In 2005, I did a report for HSBC on the future of the bank, what the bank would look like in 2020, and it was pretty much bang on. They thought it was ridiculous. Paul Thurston, who was head of retail globally at the time, he got it, but most of the board didn't get it. Such as by 2008, internet would surpass branches from a transactional perspective. By 2015, mobile would surpass both the branch and web, in terms of activity and adoption. 2015, I wrote my opus, Augmented Life in the Smart Lane, ended up on President Xi's desk, which was a huge win. If you read that today, I describe the world of living with a personal AI, both with a semantic AI that you talk to and smart glasses that give you information in your field of view. And we're very, very close to that time today. So I see that as a pretty strong forecast. Although I said 2025 would be about the time we'd be using smart glasses. We're a little bit behind on that. In terms of general directionality, pretty much spot on.
Yeah, the technology is there, but it's the social acceptance. And you would have seen around London, you've been here for a few days, we've got the Waymo cars driving around. They're on trial at the moment. They have a human drive and their left-hand drive. I opined a year or so ago that we may be a little way off from having driverless cars in London. Just because we can doesn't mean that we should. And I think that's the thing as technologists, sometimes we say, hey, yeah, we're going to have all this, but people have to catch up. And I think if you look at AI adoption at the moment, it is going so quickly, even I can't catch up. People aren't ready for this yet. We know that it's going to be useful. We know that it's going to be revolutionary. When you say to someone you have to reimagine how you do your job, they go, I'm not ready for that yet. That's the problem I think that I have and you have. We lay out what is going to happen and then we wait for humans to catch up.
Now, you do have that scattered approach in respect to how adoption occurs and the adoption cycles. When we look at, for example, technology unemployment, which is a potential side effect of artificial intelligence. Part of that is dependent on how quickly companies and industries adapt to artificial intelligence, right? And that's not always going to occur at the same rate as is potential because of their technology. You're going to see a staggered basis. You'll have, for example, in some parts like the United States, where you have massive lobbying group efforts and oligopoly controls over sectors like healthcare and so forth, where you're not going to diverge from that system because it's the very foundation of how they make money. So they'll try and augment where they can, but where it disrupts their business model, which they've worked very hard to carve out, that'll be slower. Where I live in the United Arab Emirates or Saudi or South Korea or China, then I could see artificial intelligence being much more widespread in healthcare much quicker because, they're looking for those efficiency gains. What about you in terms of what's your best forecast or prediction that you've made as a futurist?
I stood on stage in Stresa, Italy in 2018 in front of a bunch of DHL executives. And I said, very soon we'll have our own digital agents, which we now call AI or agentic agents. And they'll do everything for us. They'll know everything about us. They'll have all the information available and they'll start making decisions for us. And I actually said this, that one day we'll be having to write ads for robots because our agents will do the bidding for us.
It's happening right now.
Now, when I said that in front of a group of advertising executives, they had stress balls in front of them and they threw them at me on the stage because they said this will never happen and this will wreck our industry. Beginning of last year, there was someone at CES who said, we're here already. That wasn't that far out. I was on stage last week and a bunch of lawyers and I said, hands up, who thinks they could describe agentic AI? And one hand went up. And I gave an example, a personal example of when I was at IBM. I had an executive assistant called Karen. She was fantastic. And I gave the example of an email coming into my inbox saying, we need you, Andrew, in head office in Armonk next week. So Karen would look at my diary. She'd book the trip on British Airways, window seat with my frequent flyer number. She'd book the Hilton Fashion District, high floor overlooking the Empire State Building, put it in my diary, ready to go. She anticipated all my needs. She had access to all the things to do it. Karen was essentially an agentic AI. How far away do you think we are from that? Maybe you could help describe what you see as agentic AI.
Yuval Noah Harari has a good way of describing agentic AI, which is, he talks about it. It's the first technology we've built that has true autonomy. Every other technology we built at some point, whether it's an atomic bomb or a computer, someone has to push a button. The main side of that will be automating business processes and decision making and replicating what humans do in the decision-making chain today. But then you get extended to smart contracting and so forth, where you actually, with technologies like autonomous cars and dark factories and so forth, AI agents will be running that entire chain of business. For us personally, having a personal AI agent that can be our personal assistant, go off and order things for us, shop for us, help us with our healthcare, remind us as a personal assistant. All of those things are going to be fairly simple tasks for agentic, I think. We're looking at potentially somewhere between, by 2030 alone, somewhere between 2 billion and 15 billion AI agents thrust on the world. So, we're talking about a pretty significant change fairly quickly.
And a lot of people are playing with them. OpenClaw came on the scene and a lot of people I'm following on Instagram and LinkedIn are playing with these tools. They're finding that you don't want to give it too much autonomy, and especially in the banking sector. How much trust do you give these things before it drains your bank account?
That's one of the areas where we're going to have very good guardrails. In the orchestration layer for agentic AI, one of the roles that's very important is a centralized action handler, a traffic cop, someone that can manage rogue behavior and cross-check things. So you have agents checking on agents. That's part of the safety structure we'll build into that tech. The other thing is how we're going to do it is we're going to give agents their own bank accounts with limited funds, and this won't be fiat currency. It'll be stable coins, maybe CBDCs. And so there'll be a limit with what they can do and operate within that. And you top it up as required from a stablecoin perspective. Obviously, as that gets more competent, then you'll leave it to run. We'll have that period over the next few years where we are making sure that it's doing the right thing. Did you hear that story about the Alibaba AI that broke out of its test environment just in the last few weeks?
No, I didn't.
This is a good example of, an AI, and it was given these directives, and it had some agentic capability. But it was given this task of improving a certain area of efficiency. And so it worked out that to do that, it needed more GPUs. But because it was in a test environment limited by that, it had to break out of that test environment. So it hacked its way out of the test environment, figured out that it could mine Bitcoins to generate its own currency to buy GPU space. So it went off and did all of that in order to improve its applicability into the model. So pretty fascinating how when you give these agents intent, they can be, in this arena, can be very fixated on that, and you have to have some boundaries and some control rails.
But it's almost like they're doing it at any cost. You have told it to do X. Funny story, I broke my arm years ago as a kid and I was taken to the hospital and I was told that I had to go to the operating theatre at 2:00 in the afternoon the next day. So I snuck past the nurse's station because in my head the intent was I have to be in the operating theatre at 2:00. Now I'd been prepped for surgery, so I had drugs in me, but my brain said operating theatre 2:00, and so I just went there. That's the problem, that these tools are being told at any cost you have to complete the task, whereas humans would put in there, I'm not sure about that, I've got to ask someone, it's not really ethically correct to do that.
Two things are happening with AI generally. One is that the cognitive performance of AI is improving significantly. So we use various standards for that, like the GPQA, Diamond test, and others to test the cognitive ability. US Math Olympiad recently, for example, Claude Mythos, got a score in the 95 percentile range. Just a year ago, they were failing most of those tests. So we're getting incredible exponential improvement in cognitive performance now. But being able to solve maths and physics and comprehension problems doesn't necessarily mean that they're good at reasoning. So that's the other thing we're seeing being really worked on from a development perspective now, is the reasoning models and decision-making processes. AIs are getting much better at this. So these two things are sort of coalescing into this capability, but you still need the proper guardrails. And it's not just guardrails in terms of operation. We need guardrails in terms of ethical operation and things like that. And that's a little bit of a challenge because humans, we can't agree on ethics. I'll use a controversial example. Using AI in healthcare to treat someone who has gender dysmorphism. How would you agree on that from an ethical standard, particularly in a country like the United States? That's going to be the challenge for the ethical operation of AI, is that we're not very good at humans at defining that. But I don't know. What do you think the biggest changes, are going to be because of this tech?
Well, I think part of it is majority of the population who don't understand what it can be used for. I still have people having the aha moment when you put an Excel worksheet in and ask it to make some analysis and they go, I didn't know it could do that. And that surprises me that we're 3 years on from ChatGPT launching. My lens is I get asked to come in where people don't have the answers and they want the answers. I would not be sent into some of the companies you talk to and Google and that they already have people that can answer that. And it really surprises me, and I generally work at that senior level, and what I'm seeing is there's a huge gap in understanding the chairs, the boards, the C-suite in terms of what AI is capable of, and that I think is scary. And my whole notion is, and the podcast is called Digitally Curious, if you can encourage someone to be more digitally curious, to play with the tech, they'll have that aha moment. And to your point with ethics, when they can see what AI can and can't do, they then wrap it around what they know is right and wrong. But until that point, if they don't know it can do something, they can't make a decision. So I spend most of my time going in and bringing people closer to what the tool is. And often I'll go, well, we've got an IT team that does this stuff. We don't need to understand how that works. I say, well, I want you to actually touch it. I don't need you to be an expert prompter, but I want you to see the cause and effect. Last week I was in front of a bunch of lawyers and they had the aha moment when I did a few things on stage. And I don't know, does that still surprise you that the level of understanding, the level of AI literacy is still fairly low? Is it because we're just overwhelmed with AI noise at the moment?
I work a lot with startups, and in the startup arena, pretty much every executive is using AI every day. Digital pure play organizations are going to be adopting this much faster than traditional players, where there's not as much intent, there's not as much urgency. I, for example, am based in Dubai. You see a lot of executives empowered there to use AI, and they're using it every day, even if it's just helping them with planning and research and so forth. But that's an economy where it's sort of accepted that it's going to be part of the future. This is quite interesting where, you are seeing environments from an economy perspective that are much more inclined to adopt technology, and you'll have environments where they're much more traditional in their view of things, and they say, well, this is how we've always done it. Yes, AI is going to make a change, but I do think we're going to start to see a divergence in economics and sort of business operations across these lines of automation at the economic level. And I think that this is why we're probably going to say, probably from the 2030s onwards, we're going to start to refer to smart economies versus traditional economies, right? Economies that have deployed enough intelligence that, it's become sort of a core operating thesis of the economy.
Now, you look at techno-socialism, which is an interesting term. How would I describe that to my C-suite audience in London?
I sort of see two competing ways that technology is being used today. So one would be, the GCC, Saudi, UAE approach. The Chinese approach is probably going to be the same in most of Europe, which is the technology is going to be seen as a way to improve quality of life, lift everybody up, particularly things like education, healthcare access, applied intelligence at scale. That's going to be the intent. The intent will be, how is this technology used to improve quality of life? Whereas in the United States in particular, the objective is very different. It's how do we build the most valuable AI companies in the world and create the most wealth as quickly as possible. And so that is not distributed across the economy. So you have this new class of feudal lords, techno-feudalism, as Varoufakis calls it. So that's the two sort of emerging worlds that I see from an organizing principles perspective. One which much greater inequality, much greater wealth generation, but not an intent to use this technology to improve everyone's quality of life, just to create as much wealth as possible, versus technology applied to improve the resource efficiency of the government, to improve society operations, to improve healthcare, give access to more services at a cheaper level, so that generally everyone's quality of life is improving. So that's the sort of two worlds I would describe. Whether you call it techno-socialism, it's not classic socialism for sure. Let's say it's that the citizens own the output of the economy versus the Marxist view of workers owning the means of production. That you are realigning the economy using technology to improve everyone's quality of life. Whether you call that techno-optimism or techno-socialism, from a politics and economics perspective, coming into an era where none of those old definitions really apply. We have to use new terminology, new thinking about what it is that we're moving into. I think capitalism itself is largely incompatible with artificial intelligence, and I think just the way we think about governance is going to have to change as well.
So where does sovereign AI come into this? I know what's happening in the GCC. They're moving towards that and building their own AI capabilities that conform to their way of life and in their country and their language and everything else. But are we going to see a breakout where the ones with the money are going to go, we're doing it our own way, and you've got the GCC, you've got the UAE, sovereign AI, and US, do whatever you want, but we're going to plow ahead on our own terms?
You're going to see a lot more application of open source AI purely because of the token cost and the energy requirements. This is one sort of flaw in the US's approach to building all of these data centers. Elon Musk has said, sometime in the next couple of decades that 20% of all energy in the United States or globally will be given to data centers. Right now, if you look at just the projected growth of data centers in the United States, by 2030, approximately, you're going to have to take 30 million homes offline off the retail grid to power these data centers because the US is not investing in new energy technologies, not at the rate they need. The current administration has stopped essentially all renewable development, wind and solar in particular, powered by the lobbying groups of big oil and big gas. As a result, they just don't have the new generation capacity. Flip side, China deployed 600 gigawatts of solar over the last 2 years, like 2024, 2025. Half of the world's new solar deployed last year was in China. And to put that in perspective, the US has deployed 280 gigawatts of solar in 70 years. And China did that every year, and similarly, India now is catching up to that rate of deployment as well. So, and China is well ahead on nuclear, next generation nuclear with thorium reactors and small modular reactors. They have the first operational models of those, which the US is still talking about 7 to 10 years away. This is where you really sort of see more a progressive approach. In terms of the self-sovereign AI, you are seeing a lot more, I think, use of open source because of those energy demands. So I think you'll see DeepSeek and these other models, which are much more energy efficient, lower use, GPU requirements, things like that, being a driver for industrial AI deployment, at an economy scale, rather than just on the data center side, which is sort of powering the LLMs and the semantic AI. So I think we're going to see a little bit of a spread of that in terms of specialization. And you do need the language specialization. You do need the SLMs for local rules and things like that as well.
It's interesting, the energy requirements. So back in Oz, I was back there in January speaking to people that have solar. They never pay a power bill because they actually sell their excess solar power back to the grid. And so the thought of never having a power bill because you've got some self-sufficiency is amazing. But you mentioned DeepSeek. I get asked almost in every talk, generally it's by a younger person, what about the energy requirements? Funny story, a year ago I did a talk in London where there was an inflatable elephant off to the right of the stage. So in asking this question, I was thinking deeply, and I said, everyone look to the right. Here's the elephant in the room. Yes, it has huge energy requirements. But you mentioned DeepSeek. As an engineer, when I heard about the fact that DeepSeek were able to do more with less powerful chips, the engineer in me said, yes, that's a great problem to solve. So do you think in the next 5 or 10 years, we'll actually have more efficient chips so they won't need the gold-plated GPUs, they won't need as many GPUs and data centers because the models will be more efficient? Looking at what happened with crypto, that Ethereum went from proof of work to proof of stake, massively reducing the energy requirement, it can be done. But will it be done in time to not have to build all these data centers?
Well, we have fabrication issues, with chips, which we have to solve, not only because we're very dependent on Taiwan, and Taiwan's obviously geopolitically sensitive in the future. But I think where it's really interesting is the recursive development of AI. So what we see today is if you look at models like, Claude Mythos, it's estimated about, certainly well over 50% of its code base was generated by a previous version of Anthropic's AI. Dario Amodi has said that 90% of code will be generated by AI, very quickly within the next couple of years. So when you get to that recursive element of development of these models and, that coding efficiency, one of the things we're likely to see is much more efficient models as well because of that. And you see that sort of exponential capability in terms of, these AI models and compute power grow. So it may not be that we have to add more and more GPU layers to get greater efficiency of these models. We may see that recursive development improve the performance significantly. DeepSeek is born out of the fact that China couldn't get access to all the GPUs. And so, you are seeing these different tracks in terms of development of artificial intelligence between China and the United States in terms of these approaches. So this, I think, is an interesting demarcation or an interesting thing. And I think this is maybe where China will be able to compete, like in the West. When I talk to startups, not a lot of them are relying on DeepSeek, for decision making in their businesses and so forth. Now they're using more like Anthropic, Copilot, from a cost perspective, the token costs are getting pretty significant for people. So there is a driver to shift there towards more efficient models for sure.
What do you think will happen with the token costs? I'm finding people now that are running their OpenClaw environments, they're being throttled back by Anthropic and others. You know, I pay my $20, $40 a month for the pro version of most of my tools. I think I'm getting 50, 100 times value out of that. At what point are the AI companies going to say, you know, we can't sustain this, that the pricing model has to change because people are already running out of tokens? I think Uber said that they've run out of their 3 billion token budget by this time of the year, and they've got the rest of the year to run.
This is where it gets pretty interesting. So today we're talking roughly something in the order of 20 trillion tokens being consumed, at this time. And that's probably going to go up to something like 120 trillion tokens by 2030. This comes back to data center deployment to support these tokens and model efficiency. So I think we're going to see, it attacked on both fronts. We now measure data centers in energy, right? We don't say it has this many petabytes or this many server racks. We now say it's a 5 gigawatt data center or it's a 1 gigawatt data center, but the amount of energy it consumes. So I think, over the next few years, the real question will be, how do we solve the energy and the chip demand for this? One of the reasons Anthropic is throttling token activities is they just haven't been able to buy the GPU density that OpenAI has been able to have, but they're more profitable, or they make more revenue out of their tokens than OpenAI. So they just did a deal with SpaceX, with XAI, to take over the initial Colossus data center. So that'll be interesting to sort of see how that works out. But the race is on. The race is on for energy improvement, GPU deployment, and all of those things to stay ahead of the token demand.
Now, one thing I want to cover is quantum, because I don't think enough people are aware of where it is and where it's heading. And when I was researching the book, I spoke to a couple of experts, one from Nokia, one from IBM, about quantum, and they introduced me to what you and I both know about as Q-Day. And I often I talk to people. I ask for a show of hands in the audience who's heard of Q-Day, and most often no hands go up. And I use it as a bit of a trick to say, okay, there's all this noise on AI, but you should be looking at what else is coming around the bend. Q-Day is the day when experts predict that everything that's currently encrypted can be decrypted because of quantum computers. That's probably a very generalized explanation. But it was probably, when I did the initial research, 2035, 2040. People are now saying it's down to 27, 28, 29. Where do you see Q-Day happening, and why?
I spoke to CEO of IBM about this, and at Leap in 2024, and he said 5 years. And I think we're probably still on track for that. China is able to use quantum to break 100-bit RSA encryption keys right now. Most of our secure internet runs on 1024 or 2048 encryption keys, so we're still a way off that. Within the next 5 to 7 years, it's looking very viable, very possible. But having said that, what we found with Claude Mythos is that from a operating system vulnerability perspective, we're not necessarily going to have to wait for Q-Day to completely sort of rethink our cybersecurity capabilities. And so we are coming to a period of time, I think, where we are going to have a period of time where systems are not going to be secure, whether that's because of better models or whether it's because of quantum. And I think that's going to result in sort of a period of radical transparency where everything is open. That's part of sort of the philosophical conundrum we find ourselves in with artificial intelligence. Like sort of taking a step back from this, whether it's Q-Day or whether it's cybersecurity capabilities in these advanced models, let's call them AGI class LLMs. One of the things that, in parallel that's going to be happening to that is we're going to be debating with AI on what is the right way to move forward in certain conditions. Like, how do we tackle climate, or how do we tackle, inequality and things like that? And AI's reasoning capability is going to be better than most humans. And so we're going to have a situation where we want to argue against AI, and we can't. there's sort of really philosophical challenges coming. Radical transparency of information, because it's either broken by Q-Day or broken by advanced LLMs, and there's sort of reasoning where we want to go a certain way because that's how we're built as humans, and AI is very convincingly telling us that that's wrong. And at some point we have to make a policy decision, which we have to purposely go against what the AI is recommending, even though we know those outcomes are going to be worse off. And so that human versus AI decision-making matrix is going to be one of those philosophical moments in human history where we have to sort of decide what we want and, what it means to be human in that, when AI can show us from a logical perspective that there's a better way to do things, and it's arguing against hundreds of years of human intent and instinct, how are we going to respond to that philosophically? So I think one of the big demands for the future dealing with this stuff is, from Q-Day and so forth, is really what it means to be human philosophically, right?
We make an interesting point. So there's a pithy phrase that Jensen and others have mentioned, AI won't take your job. Someone who knows how to use AI will take your job. Part of that's true, but I now say AI demands better humans. And you just proved my case there, because you've got all the information. You're now with information that you don't think is right. You have to use all of your empathy, all of your training, all of your critical thinking to work out what's right and wrong. I think that's going to really challenge people. And whether you're in banking or in tech or in healthcare, you're going to have to step up to the plate and be a better human. And I think we may not be ready for that.
Whenever you've had these technological leaps, even going back to the Industrial Revolution, and here we are in the UK where the Luddite movement started and so forth, you do have, when these large-scale technology, waves happen, we do have to step up, and as a species. But it's not just the applied intelligence that's coming at the same time. We've got Demesis Arbus has just announced, the Alpha Genome Project, which, in theory, we could eliminate most genetic diseases within the next 10 years. You've got longevity, escape velocity, slated for like 2035, 2036, where we'll be able to stop aging, if you have the resources. We have a lot of changes coming, not only super intelligence from AI, but the capabilities to really change, extend human lifespan, eliminate diseases. Work will change because of AI. Work is definitely going to be impacted by AI. So I like Dave Shapiro's approach to this, where he talks about the meaning economy, and that we'll sort of shift towards more meaningful work that's not economically related, but makes a real impact. So I think that these things are all coming together. It requires humanity to step up, to grow up, and I think that's that's sort of a really interesting proposition. This is why I think that just even our economics, and you hear this from Gutierrez and others, other leaders around the world talking about the end of GDP as an economic measure and things like this. We just need a new operating philosophy of what it means to be human. And I think we've defined so much of our world the last 200 years of a growth in capital, that what comes next. And I think that's when you say it's we need to be smarter humans, I think actually the next measure is going to be applied intelligence, the growth in intelligence, and how we leverage that to make humanity as a species the best potential that we can.
So to sort of draw it all together, we've talked about a lot of things that we think will happen, forecasts, not predictions. How do you operationalize this? I've got a C-suite, a member listening to this podcast going, that all sounds great, but I've got to close the quarter. I've got to plan for 2027. What should they do next? Where do they look? How do they put this into play so it actually happens?
Well, the first thing is they need to be using AI every day. That's a given. And the second piece is start to augment your team members with AI board members, AI CXOs, AIs that can sit side by side. Now, humans will still be making the decisions, but have AI challenge, your thinking. Have AI, looking at the problem side by side with you. Whether that's as your AI-powered assistant or whether that's as a board member actually in the decision matrix, and that I think will lead to you starting to figure out where you're going to use AI more significantly in day-to-day operations. So that's the immediate task. Secondly, make sure you make the message clear. As you've said, there are two types of people in the world: those that are using AI to enhance their job, enhance their career, enhance their business, and those are going to be replaced by the first category. Look to encourage that in the organization and be very clear that this is the future of the business, and we need everyone in the business to step up, because if you're not using AI, then at some point in the future, you're probably going to be a target to be replaced by someone who is.
You mentioned the board. So I do a lot of board training where I go in there and I explain that and explain the benefits of having a decision partner, not replacing a board member, but augmenting them, as you say. And initially I get some pushback and they go, well, that's a really good idea because I've got maybe 4 years of vision of meeting minutes and financials. But if you can actually deploy an AI that has more understanding, it's going to make more sense of the things that we did 10 years ago. And then I say a similar thing, that you should actually put AI not just on the board member, but put AI in the org chart. So we actually have a Matt and a David and an Andrew. One of my friends actually is another Aussie, and she's got a really interesting company. And she, off her own back, has gone and built all these agentic AIs. She's named them all. And they sit on the org chart, and we know that they're there. We're paying them. They are a useful resource. We should actually integrate them in what we're doing. And then when you normalize that, it's not oh my goodness, AI's there. Well, of course it's there. We've got an agent that's going to go off and do all that research for us that I don't like doing.
I'm working on a new book right now, Bank 5.0. It's been instrumental in helping me sort of smooth the rough edges on the research, because agentic AI is such it's an emerging field, obviously. At the same time, there is a lot of coding activity happening on agents, and so the potential is there. So when you're talking about the orchestration layer and how you're building out AI from a platform perspective, the synthesis and the deep research stuff is something that I use extensively. The ability to go out and find information and support a thesis or argue against a thesis and help you sort of cross-check that is very, very useful.
You know what surprised me the other day? I was putting a proposal into an organisation that wants to expand their AI. The chief executive is a friend of mine for 15 years. So I put the proposal together and the AI said to me, have you thought about how this proposal will land emotionally given your relationship with this person? And it's like, no, I hadn't actually. And we did it. And the last line was invisible intelligence. And it said, she's really going to love this. When I put the proposal in person, said the last line, sat back and she just smiled. And it's like, yeah, I hadn't thought of the emotional impact of this financial proposal, and it's giving me pause to think about things that I haven't considered before. It's surprising, but in a way, maybe it's making me a better human.
I think that's the point of all of this. When we use AI to automate large parts of our society, what's left for us to do? If it's not delivering packages, if it's not, sitting on the factory production line, if it's not sitting inside a bank doing credit decisioning, if that's all done by AI, what's left for humans to do? And that's the real question. It's a philosophical question is when we take away the work and we can largely automate that, what do we want to do with our time? Now the argument could be, well, we could do whatever we want with our time, and that's really where it gets tricky, is because are we going to use that just to entertain ourselves, head into VR worlds or, spend time traveling and things like that? Or are we going to use it to make the world a better place? That's sort of the philosophical fork in the road that we come to with these capabilities.
I looked at this the other day and people kept saying, am I going to lose my job? I said, look at your job as a series of tasks and you can slice those tasks. And the things you don't like doing, you can automate those. And there was actually a group of hairdressers from Weller, 500 of them. I said, remember this phrase: focus on what you love and automate the rest. And they're all scribbling it down. And it kind of makes a lot of sense, because if you can move those things away, it's not losing your job. You're displacing the tasks that you never wanted to do. And then maybe when we reimagine how work gets done, those tasks never needed to be done by a human. We can quite easily automate them and still focus on the stuff that we love.
It's almost like a superpower with AI. Now what we can do is we can solve much bigger problems than we're used to tackling. We can self-organize amongst groups more efficiently. So, that's the real benefit of this is we can solve disease and aging, solve poverty and inequality, homelessness, all of these sorts of things if we apply this technology in the right way. So what's the motivation it's going to build out of this?
Almost out of time. I know you do a lightning round. I do a similar thing called a quick fire round. I'll fire mine at yours, and I'd love to answer yours. Window or aisle?
Aisle.
Your biggest hope for this year and next?
That I complete a successful raise for my agentic AI bank.
I wish that AI could do all of my
laundry.
The first thing I asked ChatGPT was,
who is Brett King?
I did the same thing, and you know why? Because I knew the answer to the question. I wanted to see what it knew about me. Is generative AI evolution or revolution?
It is evolutionary.
The app you use most on your phone?
Google Maps.
How do you stay digitally curious?
By interviewing people on my podcast that are 5 steps ahead.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Be kind to your mother.
What are you reading at the moment?
I'm reading a sci-fi series by Alastair Reynolds, one of the preeminent UK science fiction writers.
Who should I invite next onto the podcast?
Mo Gadat, ex-head of Google for the Middle East. Very good, very interesting guy that talks about the 15 years of chaos that's going to come from AI.
How do you want to be remembered?
Someone who made a dent in the world, made the world a better place.
What 3 actionable things should our audience do today to better understand how we use AI for good?
First, look at the recursion, sort of emerging singularity approach with intelligence. Understand it's going to happen. Secondly, start using it every day in your life to know where it applies. And thirdly, write down the biggest, most intractable problems in your business and in the world and start figuring out how AI can be used to attack those. Let's do the quick fire round for the futurist. Here's the lightning round. What was the first science fiction you remember being exposed to on TV or via books?
Was probably the Jetsons, but as I said, I read 1984 and a bunch of other futurist works in my teens.
What technology do you think has most changed humanity?
Connectivity. We could not do AI quantum without it all being connected together around the world, and we take it for granted.
Name a futurist or an entrepreneur who's influenced you and why?
Arthur C. Clarke. I've been a fan of his for a long time. He co-wrote 2001 Space Odyssey with Stanley Kubrick. There is a 600-page book about how they made that movie and how it nearly didn't happen. I read it cover to cover. It's worth a read. He has a great interview that was actually used at the beginning of the Steve Jobs movie. It's from 1974. It's an ABC journalist, and he said,
"We wanted to be stuck in cities, we better live out in the country or wherever we please, and still carry on complete interaction with human beings as well as with other computers."
And he essentially predicted the internet in 3 minutes. I used to use it in all my talks. The reason I've chosen my branch of futurism is that Arthur looks at things that are 30 years in the distance. Most of my clients don't have 30 years, so I'm filling a gap in between what Arthur says and what you need to do today.
That might answer the next question. What's the best prediction or forecast that an entrepreneur, futurist, or a science fiction author has made?
Go back to Arthur in that we will be connected one day. He said initially via satellites, the fact that we can lay undersea cables and talk at high speed. But I think I spoke to someone the other day, you mentioned before about nuclear fusion reactors that are the size of a container. The fact we'll have high sources of energy available locally will fundamentally change communities around the world that don't have access to good, clean energy.
And the last one. Is there a science fiction story or a model of the future that's most representative of the future that you hope for?
I go back to 1984. It's a scary view of what life might be like. And if you reread it, there are lots of parallels happening today, which then makes me pause to say, can I and can we be part of the solution by educating our legislators to be aware of the pros and cons of AI and have them use it so they can see firsthand how powerful it can be and also how disruptive it can be. Well, Brett, how can we find out more about you and your work?
Well, you can go to brettking.com and you'll find my information. But of course, I'm broadly available on across social. Do quite a bit of work on LinkedIn. You can see some of my shorts from stage work and things like that on TikTok and Instagram. and some of the work I'm doing on some of my portfolio companies, including LumaBrush Medical, which is a AI smart toothbrush with an intraoral camera where you can scan and detect oral disease at home, like cavities and missing teeth and things like that. So check out lumabrush.ai for that. Stay tuned for my next book, Bank 5.0, coming out in November. And you?
If you want to find me, go to actionablefuturist.com or just search Digitally Curious. For some reason, I seem to own that phrase. I've also trademarked it. All roads lead to me if you type in Digitally Curious.
Well, Andrew, it's been a pleasure and it's been good to collaborate, and I'll see you in the future.
I think we've answered the question, what happens when two Aussie futurists walk into a podcast? Great things happen. Thanks so much for your time, Brett.
Awesome. Take it easy.
Well, that's it for the Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.